There's something that I've always said, and it was reiterated by one of my reinsurance friends. It's the companies that get it, the companies that stay the course. And when I see something like this where you're honoring me, you don't necessarily just honor me, you also honor Utica first, because it's the dedication of the employees that we have and the commitment to Long Island and New York City that allows me to stand before you and make some comments today. On that point, they had asked me to say a few words on various topics, and the one that's on the lips of everybody is the word soft. It's not because we're getting older and our stomachs are getting softer. It's something that, you know, if somebody would have said 3 years ago, how long do you think the soft market is going to last, I would have said, don't worry about it. And about 600 articles later that you've all read, we're all reading the same thing. When is this thing going to turn? And I had somebody say something to me last night at dinner that everybody's got a different opinion. And I think if you picked up a magazine tomorrow, you'd probably get another different opinion. So bear with me for a couple of minutes on what I see as a regional company president. And certainly if anybody has any questions afterwards, I'd be happy to go through it. Think of this for a minute. You walk into an agent's office, you walk into a company's office, such as Utica First, and in many offices, what's the first thing that you see? Plaques on the wall. I happened to walk into Robert Baldwin's office this morning, plaques on the wall. Steve Rockman, plaques on the wall. And think about this just for 1 minute. How many of those companies are still in business with the plaques on the wall? How many of them really got it? How many of them stayed the course? And think of that for a second in terms of what we talk about with a soft market environment. How do you handle a soft market environment? I would tell you from the CEO's perspective, the greatest pressure that any CEO has is pressure from their board to grow their book of business. I sat at a round table with PCI about a year ago, and there was 30 or 40 CEOs from all over the country. And the number one thing that came out of that is we are receiving pressure from our board to grow. And how do you do that? Everybody likes to say we have a better model. That seems to be the word of the month, that we have put together a better model to write business. The reality of it is the better model tends to be lower prices. And in this environment, like it or not, those with the lower prices win round one. Obviously, there'll be round 2 coming, round 3 coming, and we can't fight that. I had a reinsurance friend of mine say the other day, give me the names of some specific companies, which, you know, obviously I can't mention, and say, you know, these are 2 or 3 companies that really stay the course. And I'll use that a couple of times as I go through this. Every year, they have combined ratios in the 80s, the 90s. They are 80+ carriers. They stay the course. And there's something that I learned a long time ago, and it may sound a little silly, but you play in the hard, you take a break in the soft. If you chase the rate to the bottom of the floor, you are never that much smarter than anybody else out there. I can tell you, we at Utica First look at the loss ratio on every line of business. I don't care if it's a shoe store, I don't care if it's a restaurant, whatever it is. And if I sit there and say to myself, I think I'm doing a pretty good job, and if I look at my expenses and compare them to everybody else in the industry, and say, you know, we're doing a pretty good job here. If somebody can write that, they have the price of what I'm writing, take it, because I can't chase it to the floor. I want to be around for another 50 years as Utica First, and I don't want to be one of those plaques that are one of the ones going that those guys are gone too. So that's how we operate, and I think the industry as a whole has to take that into consideration that at the end of the day, there's only so many things you can do. Some of the key words that you hear is we provide better IT service. We strive for better service. If you had 16 CEOs get up here at this microphone right now, they would all tell you, we strive for better IT service. Everybody's saying the same thing. We want to provide you with real-time capabilities. The next 16 people will say, we want to provide you with better real-time capabilities. So we're all trying to work to make a better mousetrap, but the reality of it is only a few will be able to accomplish that. Market share was one of the other topics they asked me to talk about. I remember several years ago reading an article by a very smart insurance man, and he said anybody that develops a market share driven plan in this insurance business, it's like the kiss of death. I don't care who you are, there's only one way that you develop a market share plan, and quite frankly, at this juncture in the market that we're in, is that you have to be cheaper than every other guy on the street. Nobody's that much smarter, nobody produces business that much better. You have to be cheaper than every guy on the street. My classic ending on that one is another plaque on the wall. That's my favorite thing when I go through the regional meetings. At some point in time, it all has to hit the fan. There's only so many things you have in your pockets as an insurer. You have a certain level of surplus, you have a certain level of reserves, and you have certain reinsurance commitments that you obviously want to foster, because the reinsurers at the end of the day, even though I don't think there are any reinsurers in this room, still have to make money. They are not going to give away reinsurance business. As far as the crystal ball, and again, I'm trying to keep this brief, so here's a couple of the things that I look at myself recently. As was said earlier by Mike, I sit on the board of PCI. I'm the chairman of the New York State Insurance Association this year. So we discuss a lot of what goes on in New York in general, not just Long Island and New York City, but New York in general. And these are some comments that came out of a meeting I was at about 2 weeks ago. 8 out of 10 CEOs said that the combined ratios will be higher in 2010. 51% said the premium will be flat in 2010. 72% of the CEOs said tort trends will deteriorate in 2010. I don't know about you, but none of this sounds all that great to me. If anybody's ever heard Dr. Hartley at any of your conferences, I've had the pleasure of hearing him several times and had lunch with him a couple of times. I would have to say, of all the people I've met in this insurance business over almost 40 years now, he is the smartest man I've ever met. Sitting and listening to him is a pleasure. And I was at a luncheon with him probably about a month ago, and he said some very interesting things on why he feels the soft market will turn in 2011. First of all, the companies are all, not all, but a lot of them are operating north of 100% combined. The last time this happened, the companies were operating north of 105 combined. And the reality of it is, with the level of investment returns that we've seen over the last several years, you can't operate at 105 combined and make money. Nobody is Houdini in this business. So you need to be at 100 or under and make some money. Secondly, reserves are being released. Over the last couple of years, the companies were pretty fat with reserves. This year, in 2009, I look at everybody's numbers. And I can tell you, it's very apparent to me that there's a lot of reserves being released to shore up the 2009 numbers.